The great Mike DeCourcy, you know him. He is one busy man. It is March. You know he has his dominion over college basketball. He does work on Sporting News, Fox, Big Ten Network, many other platforms, and we're grateful. I don't know how he has time for me. I mean, my goodness, but I'm just grateful for a few minutes of his time. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio, and it'll be a chance to spotlight Mike's career because so much of Mike, what you do is spotlighting other people, but now we want to reflect it back on you because you've had quite the storied career, and I think it deserves to be heralded. Let's start here. In March, how many hours have you logged in one particular March Madness as far as your coverage? Just to give us a sense of the lack of sleep and the hours that you endure through this crazy month for you.
It really is all consuming, and it consumes pretty much every day of the month when March starts, and the energy around March sort of sustains you. There isn't a probably a good night is 6 hours. When we get to the regional round, back when one used to go on the road to cover these things, the regional days were big days, the Thursday or the Saturday or the Friday, because you could actually sleep until 10 or 11 and try to catch up something. That would be, those were big days. That Thursday and Friday were always huge. It'll be a little bit different this year. And of course, it was massively different a year ago. But I am not complaining. After what we went through in March a year ago, I know there have been much worse results that have come out of the pandemic, but it was a shame to have to lose a March Madness. If we never had a pandemic, none of that would have happened, and so a lot more people would be alive and all that. I'm not going to sit here and say that the games going away is anything on the order of life and death. I'm not. I don't have sports out of perspective, but for those of us who live in this world, and there's that reliability of March Madness. It's a wonderful thing, and I do feel badly for the players who invested so much in trying to get there a year ago and were on the doorstep of it, and then it had to go away. And I certainly don't disagree with the decision to do that. I remember at the time thinking, well, can't they just postpone it, because maybe we'll be okay in 2 months? And obviously
I know. I
it
wish.
mattered.
Well, it's interesting because you look at, I'll go back and read material, not just in college basketball, but sports in general from last March or April. And you have writers and nobody really knows the future. And nobody's really been through this before. So when they're discussing in their articles about, are we going to have a season? Are we not? When you look at what has been done from a college basketball perspective, in what ways pulling off the season is a surprise, and in what ways is it not for you?
Well, once we got through into the summer and we had Major League Soccer return, the NWSL return in their bubbles, the NBA and NHL, I was pretty certain that we were going to be able to have a college basketball season. And then when the Big Ten and Pac-12 withdrew from college football season, then I started to have some concern. But ultimately, the drive of the competitors at Nebraska, at Ohio State, some other schools to get back on the field. I remember after the Big Ten reversed its decision, I did an article for sportingnews.com where I spoke to Wyatt Davis, the offensive guard for Ohio State, Sean Wade, terrific cornerback. I spoke to them and some other players in the Big Ten about what it was like to return, why they returned. And Wyatt told me that he had his plane ticket bought within a half an hour to go back to Columbus, even though he had already convinced himself that he was going, because there was no football season, he was going to focus on the draft and return. And I believe he was taking online classes at the time, but he wasn't necessary to be back at campus. But as soon as football was back on, he was on the plane. Sean was not much different. And they really wanted to be a part of that. And so once we had that happen, I was pretty sure we would have a season and an NCAA tournament. So I'm not surprised in any great way that we're having a season. I'm impressed at the diligence of the athletes. By and large, the broader picture, nearly all of them have made significant sacrifices. I understand that those of us who are in the working world have as well, but for them, it's not been easy. But they've done it. And I had a conversation, did an article after watching the first portion of the season, around Thanksgiving, first weeks of December, some of the non-conference games that were played, like here at Bankers Life Fieldhouse in Indianapolis with no fans. And I noticed that the benches, the players on the bench were trying to generate energy, the walk-ons. And so I spoke to walk-ons from Arizona, Marquette, a scholarship player at Syracuse who wasn't playing a lot, about trying to drive some energy for the team. And it struck me that, here you have walk-ons, not a scholarship, not going to play more than likely. I even mentioned that they don't even have like the student section there for if their team's up 20 with a minute and a half left, let the coach to put their favorite walk-on in. And yet there they are, still out there every day, going to practice, going to the games, trying to cheer for their teammates. And everyone that I spoke to said, this is where we want to be. And I have great admiration for them. I love the game as someone who's covered it for 35 years, but they have a very short time to play it, and they want to get that experience. It's not the same as it was a year ago. Hopefully it's not the same as it will be a year from now, but it's impressive that they've all stuck with it in the way that they have.
Mike DeCourcy, who dominates in coverage of college basketball with us. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at FSR. It's awesome that you brought that up, Mike, because I was watching a couple days ago the UCLA Oregon game up in Eugene, and I noticed that with no fans, that the Ducks bench in the second half, they started to get animated. They started to get energized. It led to turnovers being forced, and the complexion of the game completely changed. And so as somebody who follows UCLA a lot, I was like, we got to get looking forward. I'm like, we got to get our bench going, because these guys have to realize, like you said, that their contributions with being animated and being energized and being vocal and encouraging their players, that's a humongous part of a win or a loss in a game in this crazy climate of college basketball we're in. You spoke about one guy's drive to play. I want to hear about your drive and why it means so much to you to make it and be so successful in this business.
Well, I knew from, like really early, that this is what I wanted to do, that I wanted to be involved in covering sports. And I know a lot of people who are involved in sports journalism came through really more through the journalism road. I have some very good, very successful friends who had the idea that in order to become the best possible journalist, they had to learn how to cover the courts or police or something like that. And my approach to it was, if I'm going to do something I don't like, I'm going to make a ton of money doing it. That's not what I'm going to do sports. This is where I'm going to be. So I wanted to be a sports journalist. And I knew that when I was probably 9 years old. And I was a pretty good student in high school. I was no national merit scholar, but I was a pretty good student. I had probably, again, this minimum double figure teachers tell me I was wasting my ability on wanting to be a sports journalist, that I should do something more important or whatever. And my father, my late father, was a wonderful man. The last real fight we ever had was, I didn't want to take physics as a senior in high school. I knew that I wouldn't need it in college. I was done with getting C's or whatever in science. I noticed that if I took a history or English class, I was probably going to get an A. And if I took a math or a science class, it was probably somewhat less than that. So I thought, what'd be cool would be to get all A's when I'm a senior. That'd be fun. So I took English and history for the most part, psychology, those kind of social sciences. And I did get all A's. And my father and I had this huge blow up about me not wanting to take physics. And he like, what if, he said to me, what if you want to be an engineer? And I didn't have this saying at the time, but it would have been so great to like spin back on the VCR and say, have you just met me? I mean, no interest in being an engineer. I had no aptitude for it, no interest. Gosh, I can imagine how many buildings would be falling down here, you know? So we had that fight. I won. And then in the spring of my senior year in high school, I got a full scholarship to attend Point Park University in downtown Pittsburgh. And once college was free, I never heard another word about wanting me to be an engineer.
You got the last laugh. I love that. I want to go back to your teachers early on and how they tried to persuade or convince you that you're going down the wrong path as far as a career. So many would take those words from teachers and believe them and accept that as their fate. What was it internally that challenged that? And you had the headspace to say, I hear what you're saying, but I know I can do this.
Well, I think for them, it wasn't that I couldn't do it. It was that they didn't think it was worthwhile. But I wasn't very good at math, as I mentioned, but I could do a simple equation. I was figured that if I was like just about everybody else, I was going to spend 8 hours of my day sleeping. I was going to spend 8 hours of my day off, and I was going to spend 8 hours of my day working. That's 24 hours, right? 3 times 8. Yep, I got it. 20. Okay, so why would I want to spend the 8 hours of my day working doing something that I didn't enjoy? And that was really what it came down to. I knew that I would enjoy this profession. And so I never had any doubt that this was what I wanted to do, and that this is the area that was right for me. And so I mentioned the discouragement, but what I should also mention is that I got great support from 2 teachers in particular in this area. One was my sophomore year English teacher, Kathy Gray. She didn't necessarily overtly encourage me. She didn't discourage me, but the journalism teacher at our high school, Elizabeth Forward in Western Pennsylvania, Sally Hartle, was absolutely great. She was a former journalist herself. She'd worked in daily newspapers. She became a teacher, and she was tremendous. And when I tried out for the high school newspaper to be the junior sports editor, would become the senior sports editor when they were seniors. So that was big for me. I wanted to be the sports editor of the high school paper when I was a senior. So when I tried out for that, one of my best friends at the time was a wrestler, and so our assignment was to cover a wrestling match. Well, he was a wrestler, so he understood sport better. I guess his story was better than mine, so he was going to get it. And Miss Gray had told Mrs. Hartle about this project that I did, a book report, and we had to do these art things where we did some sort of collage or something like that. And mine was all basketball. And so Mrs. Hartle walked the entire editorship who had voted against me over to Miss Gray's classroom across the hallway and said, this is what Mike wants to do.
Wow.
You know, a shot. And so between the 2 of them, I mean, I don't know how it would have turned out if I hadn't gotten that. I know that I really put a lot of stock in getting that position. And so when I did, it was huge for me. And if I hadn't gotten it, I'm not sure that I would have given up wanting to do this, but a lot of things that worked out for me, including that scholarship I mentioned, would never have happened.
Here with Mike DeCourcy, obviously a college basketball insider, the guru. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at FSR. Let me ask you this, Mike. There are your peers who also have big names in college basketball. How do you feel like you're different? How you want to separate yourself in a way to your consumers, to your fans, to your followers?
I think the number one way I've tried to differentiate myself has always been by drilling down into the game. And when I started at Sporting News, we even had one of the taglines on the cover of the magazine it was called "See a Different Game."
Ah,
And the idea was that we were first and foremost then about the game. It was less about personalities. It was more about, why are teams winning and why are teams losing? Why is this athlete great and that athlete's just okay? Less about necessarily like what cars they drive or who they're dating or what particular item of adversity that they overcame in their youth is now some of that would work its way in, but it was first and foremost about the game. And those are the stories when we used to be able to go inside programs, had a lot of fun with those. We did there was one year in 2002, the 2001-02 season. So I was 2 years, I was full-time at Sporting News for about 2 years then. And Jay Williams at Duke was the best player in the country and very difficult to stop. And so our idea that we had, one of our editors came up with was we wanted to spend 3-4 days, whatever, in advance of a Duke versus somebody game, probably in the ACC, and spend time with them and ask them, how do you go about trying to stop the guy? And I will tell you that I don't know we had never had any trouble getting these access stories going. People wanted you in their program because they knew that it was probably going to be positive.
mm-hmm.
We got turned down 3 times by programs who, I think because they were afraid that they were going to say, here's how we stopped Jay Williams, and then he was going to smoke him for the
Yeah.
And so we were starting to feel like we're going to have to abandon the idea. And then upcoming was Wake Forest. And so I called Skip Prosser, who I knew I covered Cincinnati Bearcats when he was covering the Xavier Musketeers. When he was coaching the Xavier Musketeers. And Skip said, yeah, sure, come on down. And I got down there, he opened up and he started drawing on a whiteboard. Here's how we defend the ball screen. He allowed me to go to all the meetings and practice. And actually Chris Mack, who's now the coach at Louisville, was then I think the third man on the staff at that point. It's like the third guy on the staff, and it was his scout, and they trusted him, even though it was a tough one, to handle that scout. And so I watched him and talked to him and all that, and the story turned out great. It was really probably my favorite story that I ever did for Sporting News magazine. It was great. And of course, Skip was the loveliest man, and we lost him about 5 years later than that. So it was really a nice memory to have someone who I really cared about and who was just wonderful to deal with, and getting a chance to spend that amount of time with him was really a blessing.
What was your relationship with Skip like, and what made it so special?
Well, Skip's one of the best people I've ever met. And I will tell you, this is true. I hate to say this now because he's not with us anymore, but when I was covering Cincinnati, and a friend of mine, Michael Perry, who's now a editor at the Cincinnati Enquirer, he was covering the Musketeers. And when I would read the stories about Skip and some of the things that he did with his players, getting them to read books and all that, and it struck me as like, there's no way that's really him. That has to be an act. There's no way that can be true. And then as the years went by in Cincinnati, and especially after I went full time from Bearcats beat onto Sporting News, and now I was covering the whole nation full time, and I got to spend more time around him. I'm like, oh, he really is this guy. He really is this great. He's just the most delightful person. He really does care about his players' education to the level that he even tells them what books that what they would enjoy, and he quotes from the poets, and it was all real. None of it was an act. He was just a really terrific, wonderful person, and I can tell you that as much as we got to be close, that was not unique. The people who covered him daily really cared for him. Others who covered nationally had relationships with him. He just was. He got it. He understood that it was supposed to be fun. That it could be fun. That it didn't have to be a miserable experience or anything like that. miss dearly. Losing him at the age we did was very sad. One of the saddest days I've had in 40 years in this business.
That's powerful. Mike DeCourcy with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. My uncle went to Wake Forest and is a humongous supporter of the program. And him and everybody, as you can imagine, Mike, have all wonderful things to say about Skip. The guy was beloved as you described it, and I think that's the best way to do so. So you were in Cincinnati working for the Inquirer, then the call up to the big leagues was Sporting News. How did that work, that transition, and how did that become a reality?
Well, it started when I was in Pittsburgh, working for the Pittsburgh Press. I was as happy as I could be. And I was really ambitious to do a great job for the Pittsburgh Press, but I wasn't all that worried about what else was out there. And I even remember when the Sporting News what they used to do was they would hire someone who worked in newspapers, basically, to write about each of the levels, like Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, college football and basketball. That they would have a columnist who mostly worked at newspapers, and then this would be kind of a side gig. And it came open toward the end of my time in Pittsburgh. And I thought about it for about 5 minutes and thought, I don't need that on my plate too. It'll interfere with me doing great work for Pittsburgh Press and interfere with my time off or whatever. And so I didn't even pick up I didn't even pick up a pen and paper and send them a letter. And then my paper went out of business in Pittsburgh, and I went to, and I wrote, that was the time, you probably are too young to remember the National Sports Daily, but the National was basically what the Athletic is now.
Okay.
It was printed, and it was difficult to distribute, and it was costly to print. And so it was a great publication, but it lasted about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. It had gone out of business about maybe 11 months before the Pittsburgh Press went out of business. And so a lot of the great writers that had been accumulated there had yet to find jobs or still looking. So when I lost my job at the Pittsburgh Press, I mean, it seemed for a while that I was never going to be able to get back in. And I was blessed that an editor at the Memphis Commercial Appeal, Lionel Linder, decided they were the same ownership as us, Scripps Howard. And so he asked Scripps if he could save some of the people at the press.
Oh.
They offered 6 jobs. They offered 6 of us jobs, not all sports, but across the paper. I was the only one who accepted. And it was the best thing that from a career standpoint, the best thing could ever happen to me, because Memphis was a absolute hoops hotbed. I mean, it's one of the best basketball cities in the country. And whereas in Pittsburgh, I even had an editor once tell me that, that mentioning that the team shifting into a 2-3 zone was a little too complex for our audience. That is a true story. In Memphis, it was like, I couldn't tell them enough about the game. The more I could find out, or the more I knew, the happier they were, from the readership standpoint and from the management standpoint. And so that got me a chance to really dig in. And so when that job that I mentioned about Sporting News, that part-time thing came up again, I took a shot at that. And Tom Dienhart, who's now a good friend, recommended me. John Rawlings, who's also a great friend, hired me. So I was part-time for 5 years before the chance to go full-time opened up. And so I've been there ever since, now going on 22 years that I've been full-time there. 21 years.
21. Yeah, I've read you in your work at Sporting News since you started, and I mean, again, not to date anybody, but I've always enjoyed like you said, the way you break things down. You're very analytical, and I think that's part of what you do, and why I've really enjoyed your work. And then the TV started to come around. So how did that all become a big thing, from Big Ten and now obviously with Big Fox, and how that has opened up you to more opportunities, in the sense of like giving you an opportunity to get outside your comfort zone even more?
Yeah, I've always felt that when I was in college, I knew that I wanted to work in sports journalism, and so I trained myself to do pretty much everything. The Point Park's program was journalism and communications. They wanted you to have a background in all of it and then choose or have chosen for you which one you wound up in. And so I did, I worked at the school radio station, took some TV classes. I wanted to be able to do all of it. And so whatever job was available when I got done, I could do, or at least shot at. And it turned out that newspaper journalism was the one that opened up for me. I always had interest in doing broadcasting. And I will tell a story. I'm a perpetually optimistic person. I have very few bad days. One of the very few bad days I ever had was, I guess it was around 2004 or so, 2004, 2005, when CBS hired Seth Davis to be their studio analyst. Not that I didn't like Seth. Seth is a good friend, and I think he does a fabulous job. And in the end, it actually probably helped pave the way for me to be able to do what I'm doing. But at the time, I thought, I didn't even know that they were looking. I didn't know that was a possibility. Why wasn't I, why didn't I have a shot at that? It wasn't that he got it. It was that I didn't even know there was a game to play and I wasn't in it. And so I felt like I'd missed the opportunity. And then, one of the ways that, I talked to Seth then about, how it worked out for him. And one of the things he mentioned was that he had a TV agent. So I asked his agent at the time, I don't know if it's still the same person, if he would take me on. And he said, well, no, I already have Seth. And I said, no, wait a second. I'm sure you have more than one game analyst.
Yeah.
No, I guess you could only have one sports writer. Okay. All right. So I talked to another friend, Fran Fraschilla, been good friends with him for nearly 25 years. And Fran hooked me up with another gentleman who agreed to take me on.
Awesome.
He started getting me what they used to have on the regional networks. The coaches talk about March Madness. I can't remember even now what we called the program, but March Madness Coaches Show or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they used to have me come on. I did it one year with Marcus Johnson and a couple of different. They would rotate the coaches in, and then the next year, Don McLean, I did it with. And so that sort of got my toe in the water. And then my agent got me the chance when Big Ten Network started. They brought me on to do sort of like put the Big Ten in the national picture. And they had me do, and I would drive up to Columbus to Ohio State from Cincinnati. It's about an hour and a half drive. I'd drive up, I'd do a 5-10 minute hit, whatever it was. I'd get back in the car and I'd drive back to Cincinnati. And they were happy enough with what I did do there that they started then bringing me into Chicago to do longer spots. And then eventually they started the Big Ten Basketball and Beyond program the next year. And I have been the one of the primary panelists on the program for every episode of a program that's been on for 10 years. We're on hiatus for this year, but hopeful of a return in 2021, 22, and looking very much forward to that, hopefully. And then eventually that brought it from Big Ten and Beyond into doing more studio, and that ultimately led to the bracket, because Fox and BTN are interconnected. That led to the opportunity to do the brackets for Fox, and so it's it's obviously a lot of people along the way have helped me and gotten me opportunities, and the thing I try to do is I try to do the best work possible and try to be the easiest person to work with. Try never to be a challenge to work with. And it was interesting you mentioned that about comfort zone, because it's really cool to be able to do something that I haven't been doing for 35 years. And so, I'll go in and I'll do a spot during a halftime or something, and I'll come out and I'll know whether I did it the way I wanted to or didn't. And it's the challenge to try to continue to get better at that and to try to improve my on-air performance and that sort of thing, and try to be succinct and try to be smart or whatever you want to call it. And it's been really great. And honestly, the best thing that's come out of it has been that I I am way too lucky because I hear horror stories about this co-worker, that colleague, whatever. But between Sporting News, BTN, and Fox, I have never, in all that time, I mean, I just don't ever encounter difficult people. They've all been just wonderful. The BTN people, fabulous. The Sporting News people, fabulous. The producers that I work with at Fox are way too nice. It's almost unfair how blessed I've been in that department.
Well, I think your gratitude is something that comes down to how good of a person you are and how you radiate a positivity, and people feel compelled to kind of give it back, in a way like that. So if there's anybody that deserves that for the way they behave themselves, why they comport themselves, it's you, Mike. I hate to say it, but you deserve it, and you've worked yourself for 40 plus years doing what you love and have had such a great attitude through it all that of course you deserve to be treated that way. And certainly somebody kind of wanted to wrap up here by asking you, you're a soccer guy as well. How did that become such a huge part of your life?
It's interesting. I grew up in the 70s and soccer did not exist. I mean, I know it was out there, but
Yeah.
as someone who, like I said, I mean, fourth grade, I knew I wanted to be a sports writer. So, I mean, that sports has been like everything for, 50 years. But I like soccer did not exist where I grew up. I mean, it was never mentioned. It wasn't on television. It didn't come up. And the cool thing in my age group and my profession was to hate it. I mean, that was the cool thing to do, was to hate soccer. Everybody did. And I can tell you that there's a lot of my colleagues who are ballpark my age. I even had one very prominent sports journalist one time tell me he muted me on Twitter because I was tweeting too much about a USA Soccer
Oh my gosh.
World Cup qualifier that I covered. So it's out there. But in 1990, for the first time, the whole thing was put on TV in the US. And I thought, you know what? If it's going to be on and it's this big, I want to find out. Like, I'm gonna watch. And I don't remember how much I committed to, but I'm gonna watch. And I don't know how long it took. I think it took one game for me to go, wow, this is cool. And I just got absolutely hooked in during that World Cup. I everything about it. I think part of it was that here I was in my 30s now, and it was like getting a chance to be 7 years old again and collecting. To learn all these things that I had no idea. It was all brand new to me. Corner kicks and channels and headers and all the rest of that stuff. I had no idea about any of it. I remember I even covered a high school soccer game 5-6 years before that, and I had no idea what was going on. I still don't know how I wrote the story, but I got into it that month, and I watched every game I could. And for the longest time, it was just the World Cup because there still wasn't any soccer on American television, except for the World Cup. And then they started putting qualifiers on once the U.S. became at least marginally popular. But there wasn't that much to follow. And then MLS came along, and then the Premier League started to be on Fox Sports World, and then all that changed, so that it just kept becoming more and more a part of my passion. And it probably replaced some other sports in terms of what I do, what I care about. Even though we're now 30 years down the road, I'm still as fascinated by it as I was at the beginning. I really love the sport. I enjoy getting a chance to dabble in it. I won't pretend that I'm an everyday sports journalist, soccer person. College basketball is first, NFL is second, soccer's probably third. But I got a chance because of this. One of the interesting things about it, and what those who still hate soccer miss, is that soccer took me to Germany for the World Cup as a spectator in '06. It's taken me to England twice. to watch Premier League games. I got the chance to go to Brazil in 2014 to World Cup. So it's kind of taken me around the world. And as much as I love college basketball, it hasn't been able to take me to Brazil.
From covering a high school soccer to working World Cups, Mike DeCourcy deserves it, and he has shown that he's versatile. There's no question about it. Soccer, college basketball, NFL, you name it. One of the great guys, one of the classiest guys in the business. So grateful, Mike, to have a couple minutes of your time and look at your career. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio. Thanks again, Mike. Really, really appreciate it.
Oh, enjoyed it very much, Brian. Thanks for having me.